Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I welcome you back to part 2 of a 2-week series, and our topic is leadership. And I have to say that I certainly enjoyed the interview last week, and we're fortunate to have the same guest back. Our guest is Mark Altman, and he's written a book that we are discussing titled Leadership for All the Mountains You Climb While Loving the View. I really like that title. It is from Author House, and it's up on your screen now. And a little later we'll tell you a website where you could seek more information if you wish. Our distinguished guest served in the United States Army for 20 years, and he left the service with the rank of major. He holds a baccalaureate degree in applied arts and sciences, history, political science from Stephen F. Austin State University. He also holds a master's degree from the same institution, interdisciplinary leadership, political science, and counseling. At the present time, he's working at that fine institution, Gonzaga University, working on his PhD. He's a graduate student there. Mark, you were so articulate last week, and welcome back. We look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much as well.
And I'm so pleased to have our two regulars. First of all is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Erna Reinhardt, who is Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and Janelle will commence today's questioning.
Welcome back, Mark. It was very interesting last week. We talked about some of the old ways of viewing leadership, and we also talked about your idea of leadership, that there are perhaps 4 components. One would be filial love for the people you're going to lead. Another would be vision or destination, where the organization is going to go. The third one would be source of power, and a fourth one that would be some management skills. But this week I would like to talk a little bit about some ways to become a better leader. You have 12 ways to become a leader that you put forth in your book. Can you share some of those with our audience?
Sure. I'm a little leery, as I mentioned in the book, I'm a little leery of giving these 12 steps, because it's kind of like going to someone and teaching them how to drive a car using about 2 sentences. There's a whole lot of detail involved there that you kind of miss out on when you only use a few sentences.
That's what 30 minutes does to us.
Yeah, exactly. But I would say the first thing is to develop that sense of filial love, and then to be willing to show that care and compassion. The next thing is to figure out first what you inside hold to be important, right? What your personal vision is. It's very difficult to lead others when you don't even know where you're headed. The next thing, and one of the ways you can do that, everyone has seen the old cliched movies, right, where the person is laying there on their deathbed, hopefully after a long and productive life, but they're laying there on their deathbed, and right before they pass away, they see this movie in their head that of all the loves and losses and successes and triumphs and failures and so on, but they see this movie in their head of their life. Well, using that same idea, imagine yourself as that person. And what do you want that movie to look like? Do you want it to be filled with lots of loving family around you, or do you want to know that you're leaving behind an organization that's been very profitable and that has provided goods and services, maybe even much needed goods and services to people? Is it both? Is it neither? But what does that movie look like? And then the next thing is to dream big. One of the biggest failings I think that people have is that we buy in so many times. We buy in when people tell us that we can't do something. Now, there's a difference between being told you can't do something and being told, hey, wait a minute, that's great that you want to do X, whatever it is. However, there's some problems. You have to be able to afford it. For example, if someone said to you, I want to go to Harvard. Well, you have to do well on the SAT. You have to be able to afford it. There's some things you have to do, but that's being told those things is a different thing than being told, I'm sorry, you're just not bright enough to go to Harvard, or whatever other thing they might tell you. The next thing is to learn to listen, to be able to really listen, to care enough to listen to the people around you, to listen to their dreams and their hopes and aspirations, And then to be able to roll those hopes and dreams and visions into your own. And I talk about it as a painting, right? Imagine that you're looking at a mural, and on that mural, you see you're painted right there in the middle somewhere doing whatever it is you're doing. And off on one side of the painting, we see the other people, another person in your vision, and they're accomplishing their dream. And in another piece is another person, and so on. So the mural of your life is really made up of small pictures of those relationships around you and how you are helping them accomplish their dreams as well. And then learn to communicate your vision to everyone you meet. And you mentioned this last week about communication, how there are certain people who are more talented at it than others. And I guess I do mean to be articulate, but only a little bit. I mean, I think really that if you're passionate, but you have a lack of vocabulary, that certain lack of vocabulary or lack of even of poetry of thought when you're communicating, that can be overcome because people see that burning passion inside you, and they know that passion just isn't for their own dream, but it's for your dream too. And I think then that can be overcome. And then the next thing is to become educated. And of course, we're doing this here at a college, and I certainly do mean, to a large measure, a formal education, because I think that tends to be, strangely enough, I think it, in the big picture, is the easiest way to become educated. I mean, we have a couple thousand years now of process that helps people become educated. Now, could you do it on your own? Certainly. When I was a kid in high school, there was a lady in Houston where I used to live who actually passed the bar exam and had never been to law school. In fact, had never been to a university. So is it possible to do that? Sure. But I think she would be the first to tell you it was a very difficult way to get there. And so my point is that use the system to help you become educated. And by the way, I do mean studying history and political science and math and science and psychology and all the things that make us what we are, not just the practical things like being a business major or something else, but all the things that make us human. All of those things help us draw in information and make our dreams bigger and so on. So I think that education is a huge piece of this. And then I think the next thing is to have a source of power. Again, we talked last week about the fact that power is very often viewed as a negative thing, but I don't think that it is. I think that power is necessary, and I think that normally power is used for a good thing, for good purposes. However, the more power one obtains, the more lightly and the more gently one should wield that power. And I think that if in the Army, some of the nicest people I ever met were generals. You know, they were typically good to everybody they met. Now, I guess one could argue that they were that way because they had reached the pinnacle of where they were headed. But having met many, many of them, I don't think that was it. I think that they had been successful because all of their career, the more power they had gained, the more lightly and more gently they had wielded that power. And the next thing is learn to be a good manager, learn to manage assets well. But I'm not including people as part of those assets. I don't believe that people should be managed. I think that people should be led, people should be loved, and that kind of thing, but never managed. Because as soon as you start managing someone, A, they know you're managing them, and B, it almost never works out good for you or for them in the long run. The last thing is to take risk. I think that we take risk personally, and then I think the people who are, again, for lack of a better word, above us in the hierarchy, I think they should allow us and encourage us to take risk. If no one in the organization is willing to take risk, you're going to have a very slow, methodical pace to getting where you're going. It's only in taking big risks can we get big rewards. And then if you've done all the above 11 things, then the last thing is to never give up. Never, ever, ever give up. And that becomes so important because typically people, at the first sign of difficulty, they cave in and they say, well, I guess I just wasn't meant to do that. And of course, Teddy Roosevelt's famous quote about being the person in the arena and being bloodied and failing, but then rising above that, is such a hugely inspirational idea, and I think hits the mark right on the head.
Reinhardt.
Those are absolutely wonderful. I love that list of 12. I want to go back to number 2, the personal vision, and tell us how important that is as a foundational piece and how people might be able to develop their own personal vision.
Sure. I think that, as we mentioned before, I think the nurturing of someone, if someone is feeling nurtured and they know that they're loved and protected with an umbrella to some measure, especially as a child, but even through adulthood, they are more naturally going to take risk. I think we can see that in children on the playground, we see it in the classroom, we even see it in our organizations as adults. When people believe that it's going to be okay if they fail, they're much more likely to take those chances and to develop that vision. But I think in a more formal sense, the way we develop that vision is, I think, and in fact, there's a tool in the back of the book, a method that I have outlined that makes it very easy. It's a fill-in-the-blank kind of method. I divide life into the major categories of life, the major categories of goals, setting broad goals, having spiritual goals, although not necessarily church goals. For most people that tends to be, but not for everybody. Have service-oriented goals. One of the things that we find in research is that people who perform service for others tend to be happier, they tend to be more well-adjusted, they tend to be more resilient. And so those service-oriented goals are very important. Next, in my mind, are family-oriented goals, educational goals, physical fitness goals. We're now beginning to understand how important physical fitness is to the whole mind-body relationship. And then last would be battery charging or fun goals, right? The fact that you would like to drive a NASCAR race car is a wonderful thing, and I think you ought to try to do that.
Just like Tony Stewart.
Yeah, exactly.
My favorite NASCAR driver. I wonder
Thank
why.
you.
I wonder why, yeah.
Sometimes the temptation is too great. I want you to distinguish between a well-educated person and another person who's well-educated but also has wisdom.
Well, I think I would argue that I might argue that the well-educated person, the truly well-educated person, would be someone who has both looked inward and who's looked outward and had mentors that helped them with both of those things. And therefore, in order to be well-educated, I might likely argue that you have to have wisdom, and that the developing of that wisdom is something that comes along the way, both with reading outside oneself and developing empathy through that reading, but then at the same time, a serious amount of inner reflection. And that is one thing, and maybe this is what you're driving at, that's one thing we tend in our hurry-up society, we tend not to do that very well. We tend not to value that nearly as much, I think, as some of our past societies and past cultures have tended to do.
That leads to another question that you remind me of. Not to be overly critical, but with modern technology and with all the things we have, like, of course, we have the internet and we have the cellular phones and we have the music, and some wonderful young people, they have them in their ears all the time. They never speak to you unless they're in a situation like class, and they seem to isolate themselves. And is that a hindrance to talk about what you're talking about, being quiet and reflecting? And can we become in such a high-paced technical world that really can hinder the inner self's development?
I think it can be. The interesting thing is technology, like just about any other tool, can be used for good purposes or ill. Right. And I think that by the same token, technology can connect us, right? I mean, you and I can send emails back and forth. For that matter, if you were on the International Space Station, you and I could still email back and forth. So technology can connect us in a way that was impossible even a few years ago. But on the other hand, you're right. That same technology can tend to build walls between us and allow us to be isolated within ourselves, but yet not examining ourselves either. I mean, it's almost like we can separate ourselves from ourselves. And so you're right. I think that the potential is certainly there.
One of the things that's discussed in higher education today, and I agree with you that the technology is wonderful and it connects us around the world, and also people who live in rural areas that can't come to a campus to get all their courses. But if an institution allows an individual to get their baccalaureate degree, for example, without ever entering the campus, doing it through internet classes and distance learning and those kind of things, don't we lose from that social interaction that's crucial as part of a whole person?
Well, I think you can certainly make that argument. I know that for me personally, now having done far more years of schooling than I'd like to admit, the most fun that I have is being in a classroom and interacting with other intelligent, articulate people, and that interplay of getting to know their thoughts and then to be able to think about that in a real way, and then hopefully being able to offer them something in return. And I think you're right. Until we get to the point that, and even if we do get to the point that broadband and so on allows us to virtually be in the same room, you can't virtually reach out and hug someone or pat them on the back or shake their hand or whatever. You're right, that space, at least for us now, I mean, maybe one day we'll evolve, if you will, to overcome that limitation, but right now we can't have the same depth of personal relationship unless we are in personal relationship, and some of that does mean having to be together.
Thank you. Janelle Burke.
I have two questions. The first one is, hopefully they're fairly short. The first one is, in most organizations, now I'm thinking particularly of workplaces, but in other organizations as well, there's a certain amount of complaining that goes on. What does a good leader do when faced with the complaining? And I'm not talking now about a complaint through a formal channel. I'm talking about
Sure.
the general complaining that goes on in most organizations. How does the good leader respond?
Well, I mean, I think if it's just general kind of, oh, my back hurts today, or the tire went flat on the car, or what, that kind of thing, then I think that, a certain amount of empathy and listening and just, showing that you do care about their feelings and whatnot is valuable. I also think that a sense of humor can certainly help the person to understand not only that you care, but and commiserate to a degree, but also kind of helping them overcome whatever negative feeling was complaining. But then there comes a point at which that if the complaining is either consistent enough, on topic I mean, that it's consistent enough and or it touches on something that affects the organization as a whole, then I think, taking it seriously and really saying and trying to put yourself, again, that empathy, trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes and saying, wow, why are they complaining? Is it really because of something that either I'm allowing to happen or I'm not doing? Or is it just that they tend to be a negative person? But really trying to look at it from their viewpoint. And while it may not be a problem for you, once you put yourself in their shoes, you may be able to say, well, yeah, I can see why from their perspective it's an issue.
The second part of my question is, who would you suggest that people might read if they want to learn more about leadership?
Sure. Boy, there's a laundry list there. The Gonzaga's School of Leadership is a servant leadership-based school. And so I would probably, because of that, but also I have bought into that model, I would say certainly Robert Greenleaf. I certainly would say that if you're looking for either political leadership, something about political leadership, or about the relationship of power, Dr. James McGregor Burns' Pulitzer Prize winning, National Book Award winning book called Leadership would be a fine place to start. Now, it's a healthy book. It's 800 pages probably. Also, Stephen Covey, his book Principle-Centered Leadership is certainly a good work. Meg Wheatley's work, Dr. Meg Wheatley's work is a fine work. Anything in the genre of servant leadership. Servant leadership is fairly new. Robert Greenleaf wrote about it in the 50s initially. and it's grown since then, both in academic rigor and in acceptance. But we're really just starting to begin to tap the innate power, if you will, but both intellectual and otherwise, of servant-based leadership. So that's where I would encourage people to start, is with servant-based leadership.
Thank you.
Erna Reinhardt.
Mark, I'm going to put you on the spot just a little bit, and maybe not on the spot at all, but are there any modern day leaders that you feel come close to your list of 12 qualifications? Anyone that comes to mind?
Wow, modern day leaders. Yeah, actually, to tell you the truth, there are a ton of them that I served with in the Army. I mean, just absolutely an incredible bunch of men and women who, by the very nature of the fact, I guess, that they volunteered to serve something larger than themselves. And I don't, I don't want people to take away from this some kind of political statement about what's currently going on in the world. I mean, totally irrelevant of that. People that I've known for 20 years who, long before Iraq or Afghanistan ever started, and they'll be hopefully around long after those conflicts have ended, and still providing selfless service to the nation and to our armed services. So those people certainly fit the bill. I was asked recently on the radio about the current presidential candidates and kind of bouncing them against these four characteristics, if you will. I certainly am very impressed, and again, I mean this in an apolitical way, but I'm certainly very impressed with Senator Obama and the way he has managed to articulate a vision that captures people, even if, and even Senator John McCain and others who obviously are at the other end of the political spectrum from him, have made comment about his obvious gift for oratory and to be able to spell out a vision that, even if you don't agree with the eaches, the way he spells it out is phenomenal. Certainly, Senator Clinton shows a comfort with wielding power. Now again, whether or not that wielding of that power is in a good or bad way is not for me to say, but merely that she does know the inner workings of wielding power. And I think that Senator McCain, with his many years of service in the Senate, has shown, and again, I don't mean about issues or politics, but merely he's really shown a way or a method of management skills that really have been illustrated, I think, time and time again. So yeah, I think that there's a number of leaders that we can see that have some of those characteristics, and then in others maybe they not as much as some of their contemporaries.
Great.
A little bit earlier you talked about when you're exercising power, and some individuals when they have an extensive amount of it handle it with a lot of caution, and some don't. If you look in international politics, of course, one of the worst persons ever in abuse of power was Adolf Hitler.
Sure.
But in our own country, there's different degrees of how power is used. And a U.S. senator said to me one time, who was chair of the Foreign Relations Committee in a very powerful position, and in a conversation with him, he said, "Tony, when you have a significant amount of power, be very afraid of it. Use it with caution." And I was very impressed by that. I'd like to have you to elaborate upon that, how leaders do deal with their power. And you said on the show last week that power has a lot of good things, and the courts and law enforcement and combating crime is an example of power in a very positive way. So elaborate a little bit on that issue.
Sure, I think that I would totally agree with that senator that the more power you have, the more grace and compassion that you should wield that power with. I read a quote recently that I can't quote it right now, but to paraphrase it, it essentially said that all power must be moral power, or in the end, it's no longer power. And I think that that's true if one takes a long view. I mean, even your example of Hitler, right? His stated objective was that the Third Reich would last 1,000 years. Well, in fact, it didn't last 10 years. As we say, from soup to nuts, it didn't last 10 years. And much of the reason was because he was not able to handle that power with any amount of grace, for that matter. And so I think that I do really believe that the more power you have, the more it's incumbent upon you to wield that power as gently as possible. Now, by the way, that's not to equate it with being cautious, right? I mean, I can think of Lincoln, I can think of a number of presidents and other people who really took huge risk in the way they used power, but that's not the same thing as not doing it with grace or compassion.
Our viewers who've been watching, we need to give them your website again because they may want to look up your book and other information. So the staff will probably put it on the screen. And what you give that website now?
Sure, it's www.altmanleadershipcenter.com.
And so Altman is A-L-T-M-A-N, and leadership we know, and center we know.com. So our viewers may want to that. Janelle, we have time for one more question.
Well, before we were talking and you told the tale of the wise men and the elephant, would you share that with our viewers? Please?
Sure, and this illustrates what I was mentioning.
In about 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. Several wise men who are blind go into a village, and the villagers, to make fun of the wise men, have them touch a different part of an elephant and ask them what it is. And of course, one of them says it's a tree trunk because he feels the leg, and another one the tail another one a rope because he feels the tail, and a big snake because he felt the trunk. And of course, the villagers get a laugh because in fact they don't describe the elephant at all. And in a very real way, that's how we sometimes think of leadership. We're so busy describing bits and pieces and parts of it that sometimes we don't back out enough to see the entire elephant for really what it is.
Thank you.
It's a good note on which to end the program. And ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Mark Alton, who wrote the book, Leadership for All the Mountains You Climb While Loving the View. For 2 weeks, we've been really analyzing and dealing with leadership. Every year we come to an end for that year, and I want to thank our two wonderful panel members. And Janelle, you've been with us a really long time, and we appreciate that. And Erna, you've done a tremendous job too.
Thank you, Tony.
And I want to say to our producers and to our crew, you couldn't be better than you are. They're so professional, and it's because of those behind the scenes that we are able to do what we do. And of course, the panels here, you can see them. But we've worked with our crew in an incredibly wonderful way for another busy year. And last week, Mark, we taped the 1800th weekly program.
Wow.
And so, and this will air in October. We're doing it we're so far ahead, we're doing it in April, but it will air in October. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.